So we hope everyone had a wonderful lunch and time to get together and chat and see old friends, meet new friends. How many people have enjoyed this conference so far? I can see, yes? And here's what I do, a quick reminder. This conference is brought to you by the Art Historian Southern California in partnership with the Getty Research Institute, but every year the Art Historian Southern California put on a conference like this. It is only possible through our membership, which is a modest $20 and $10 if you're a student, and that gives a full year access to everything, including any other events that we sponsor. We've sponsored curatorial walkthroughs, intimate events with writers and curators, and more social events. And so this year, because we were doing it at the Getty, we did not require a membership to be part of the conference, which is usually how we fund the conference. So we really depend upon you saying, hey, this was great. I want to support the Art Historian Southern California. So Ellis is back there, and while you're leaving, if this was fantastic, we would welcome having you as a member of our organization. If you don't feel comfortable joining us, please give us your email, and we will keep you informed as if you are a member until you are ready to join us. So that's my last plug to our organization. And now, I have to say, Tom Fallon and I, I'm going to do a quick thing. I love Tom Fallon. I met Tom at College Art Association way back in like 2005. And at the time, I was new at SMC, but we needed to hire some new art historians. And Tom was one of the first people that we brought in when I became a full-time faculty, and we were colleagues for a long time. And then he got the job at LA Mission College, and I kept saying, Tom, we need you on the board, we need you on the board. And he finally joined the board this past year. And as we were focusing on this conference, one of the things we realized initially is that for a conference to be successful, we need a great call for papers, meaning lots of people. Over 40 papers were submitted for this conference, and we selected 6. So we had an amazing pool of conference. And part of the reason why we had such a great pool is that everyone knows Charlene Villaseñor Black, who's going to be our keynote speaker. And so getting her to agree to be our keynote speaker was in fact Tom's suggestion, and he's the one who reached out to her. So this next part of our day is all because of Tom. So I'm going to introduce Tom, who will introduce Charlene. Thanks, Tom.
Oh, thank you. It's really nice. I'm flattered. Thank you, Walter. I'm quickly going to introduce our keynote speaker, and then we are going to hear her speak. Charlene Villaseñor Black, as you can see here, she's the professor at UCLA, and I'm just going to mention that she's recently a recipient of the UCLA Gold Shield Award for Academic Excellence for 2016-2017. So please give a warm welcome to Charlene.
Thank you so much to Professors Foland and Myers for inviting me, and to the people at the Getty for helping me with all of the arrangements, and to the wonderful papers that we've heard already today. I'm really humbled to be here and honored, and I look forward to our discussion. I begin today with a deceptively simple question. What is the current state of the study of Chicanx and Latinx art? It's also a timely question. Here in Southern California, we're now in the midst of Pacific Standard Time 3, LALA, Los Angeles, Latin America, or LALA, as some people are calling it. The landmark Getty initiative of 80 exhibitions on Latin American and Latino art. The moment is historic. Never before have so many shows been mounted featuring these overlapping fields of Latin American and Latino art. Art history, museums, artistic practice will be forever changed. Momentum has been building of late. Last year in Chicago, during what was dubbed the Latin Spring, there were 45 exhibitions of Latinx or Latino art, a record number for that city. The Whitney Biennial, which opened at the Whitney Museum of American Art on March 17, 2017, featured a record 7 Latinx artists of the total of 63, a record number that contrasted with the 2010 biennial, which had 0 Latinx artists. And that, of course, is Rafa Esparza, Beyond the White Field. And then this got actually a little bit less press than this work, right? The controversy, the Dana Schutz piece over the Emmett Till open casket work there. The question they opened with is also timely because the first major national touring exhibition of Chicano art originated in 1990, 27 years ago, at UCLA, then traveled around the US until 1993. I'm referring to Chicano Art, Resistance and Affirmation, or the CARA show. In the years since that historic show, a lot has changed in the art world and academe, but Chicanx and Latinx art still have not been fully accepted into art history. These two fields move para adelante, para atrás, forward and backward, in Nepantla, to use a Nahuatl word, between art history and ethnic studies, between American and Latin American art. My talk today, equal parts original research, testimonial, and activist call for change, examines published research on Chicanx, Latinx, and Latin American art since CARA, as well as teaching and exhibition history. As I reflect on being both an art historian and an ethnic studies scholar, positioned in between the rarefied, privileged world of art history and the activist politics of Chicano studies. Let me contextualize my mapping of these trends, then I'll clarify some terminology. In 2016 at UCLA, I officially moved half of my tenured line as a full professor into UCLA's Cesar E. Chavez Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies from Art History, the department into which I was hired in 2000. I also serve at UCLA as Associate Director of the Chicano Studies Research Center, and I was Acting Director in 2015 in the fall. In January 2016, I assumed the editor-in-chief position of Aztlán, a journal of Chicano Studies, the oldest and most esteemed journal in the field. I continue to publish, advise, and teach in two areas: the early modern Iberian world, the field I trained in, and Chicanx art, a field I've been working in since the 90s. So just some of my publications, and then you can see this list of the courses I teach, that I am still very much split into these two fields. Because words produce meaning, terminology for me is important. So by Latin American art, I'm referring to art produced in any of the countries of Latin America, and this, of course, is a designation dating from the 19th century and its French in origin. So from Mexico to Central America to South America, including the Caribbean, countries that experienced Spanish and or Portuguese colonialism. By Latino, and this is a much more complicated discussion, I mean people in the US of Latin American descent. And I'm showing you the variations of how this word can be presented, right? So it can be rendered as just Latino, meaning all of us, like men. People used to say men, meaning all of us. It can be rendered in the grammatically correct way, Latino OA. You can reverse the O and A, so it's Latin O, to upset the privileging of the male gender. There's a variation on that, the Latino with the @ sign there. And now we have the X of Latinx intended to upset this gender binary altogether here. And then Chicano, of course, is the identity label preferred by a significant number of politically conscious Mexican Americans, and you can see it follows a similar pattern: Chicano, Chicanoa, Chicanao, Chicanao, or Chicanx. And then there's a newer development that I'm seeing primarily on the East Coast to get rid of this OAX problem. Something a little more easy to pronounce in Spanish, the A, so Latine, right? These categories are controversial, and I look forward to discussing them at the end. I mentioned these recent developments of 2016 at UCLA because becoming the editor of Aztlán was the impetus for the research I share with you today. I began my new editorial post by reading every single issue of Aztlán, and in the process noticed something. The journal had published a lot of articles on Chicano art. I was inspired to track and document where else research on Chicano art had been published. Professor Adriana Zavala had done something similar, and she's at Tufts, tracing the development of the fields of Latin American and Latino art, including who is teaching the subject and their training, and dissertations in these fields since 1992, which she published in the dossier that I guest edited in spring 2015 in Aslan. Her comparison to the development of Latin American art history, which seems to be thriving on its way to acceptance into art history, is sobering. Far fewer people are teaching Latino art history in art history departments, and far fewer dissertations are being produced in the area. I began to wonder, has art history passed up its chance to make an impact on the study of Latino art? My other source of inspiration is VIDA, Women in Literary Arts, an organization founded in 2009 by the poets Erin and Kate Marvin. It's best known for The Count, a yearly tally of the number of women published by or whose books are reviewed in 39 key literary journals and periodicals. Not surprisingly, The Count, which began in 2010, has loudly and clearly demonstrated the enormous gender imbalance in the literary world in publications and book reviews. VIDA stirred up controversy, and it affected change. Literary journals now brag about improving their VIDA count. After taking over as editor of Aslan, I began my own count of articles published on Chicano and Latino art history in major art history journals. Let's begin with what the College Art Association website describes as, quote, the foremost journal for art historians in English. That is the Art Bulletin. First issued in 1913, its purpose is to, quote, publish original scholarly research in all areas of the history of art and architecture, end quote. I admit I began with an easy target. The Art Bulletin has never published anything on Chicano or Latino art and can only claim to have printed a small number of articles on Latin American art, including pre-Columbian, colonial, and modern, although admittedly Latin American articles have slowly begun to increase. Nor has Chicano or Latino or even Latin American been a subject of CAA's prestigious monograph series, which was in press from 1944 until 1999. In 1998, CAA launched its online book reviews site, and I'm showing you a screenshot of its field editors taken in 2016. Chicano and Latino art are not even categories, although presumably books in these areas could appear within contemporary or 20th century art or American art. I know that when I was the Latin American Reviews editor from 2007 to 2011, there was some discussion of where Latino publications would be reviewed by me, by the contemporary art reviewer, but honestly, I don't recall ever having to confront this issue during my tenure in the position. One could argue, though, that the Art Bulletin doesn't usually publish on contemporary art, although that has begun to change somewhat since about 2000, and that we should look elsewhere for research on Chicano art. CAA's other flagship publication is the Art Journal, first published in 1931, and according to its website, quote, devoted to 20th and 21st century art and visual culture, end quote. It is published quarterly, and since 1980, each issue is devoted to a theme, curated by a guest editor selected by the editorial board. Up until 1989, the 6 to 8 members of that editorial board were all required to live in the New York City area. I know. I have inventoried that journal as well, beginning with the year 1965, for its coverage of Chicano and or Latino art. And I'm happy to report that there are several key important articles on these subjects. So there's Raul Lopez writing in 1974, curator at the Fowler Museum, publishing this article, and he actually did an MA at UCLA in what was regrettably called at that time primitive arts. There's Schiffer Goldwyn, 1984, the pioneering art historian who helped establish the study of both Chicano and modern contemporary Latin American art in the United States. this important essay on Chicano posters that's still important in the historiography. And then in 1990, the iconography of Chicano self-determination. And this was in a themed issue, Depictions of the Dispossessed, that was guest edited by her UCLA colleague and ally, Cecilia Klein, and you see them there, raising their at the Cara exhibit there. This edition, or this issue, also included an article on colonial Peru by Rolena Adorno, an article on depictions of the Indian and 19th century Mexican painting by Stacy Whitfield. And then there are several other essays I should mention in the Art Journal that are important. Mary Carmen Ramirez, Beyond the Fantastic, an exhibition history of primarily Latin American, but also with some important discussion of Latino art in 1992. And then on an Indich 2001, Pepon Osorio, and a short piece by Holly Barnett Sanchez in a themed section on Latin American art criticism in which she looked at Tomás Ibarra Frausto and Amalia Mesa Baines. Chicano and Latino art is included several other times in the Art Journal, not as the sole subject, but incorporated alongside Latin American or contemporary art, a potentially fruitful but also problematic strategy. Books on Chicano and Latino art are reviewed regularly, and Art Journal has expanded its purview from mainstream Euro-American contemporary artists to what could be described as global contemporary. Although in my opinion, this new field of global contemporary tends to leave Chicano and Latino art behind. And it's another controversial topic that I'd love to discuss with people. There are, however, no special editions or themed editions dedicated to Chicanx or Latinx art. So where are the publications on Chicano and Latino art? It's a great question, right? Well, some appear in edited anthologies. And this is a sensible strategy for scholars in the field who understand that their work is not likely to be welcomed by art historians. These anthologies tend to be situated in ethnic studies and thus find a ready audience. One concern I have, though, is the lack of peer-reviewed journals publishing Chicano or Latino art history. While edited anthologies are also peer-reviewed, they are not held in as high esteem as flagship journals when young professors come up for tenure. On a more positive note, though, I discovered in the course of my count that a significant number of important articles have been published in Aztlán, the leading journal in Chicano studies, and in other similar journals, the Journal of Latino Studies, Diálogo, Voces, and others, for example. Aztlán was founded in 1970, 47 years ago. It was the second journal in the field. It was preceded by El Grito, which was issued at Berkeley in 1967, but which discontinued publication in 1974. The first editor of Aztlán was UCLA history graduate student and later professor Juan Gómez Quiñones, and I'm showing you here the very first edition of the journal with a striking graphic image in the style of ancient Mesoamerica on the cover by artist Judith Hernandez, who's here today. Born in 1948 in Los Angeles. And here are several more covers by her demonstrating this indigenizing style that she was bringing to the covers then. And after Judith Hernandez did the covers underwent various transformations, sometimes the table of contents there, sometimes without artwork, sometimes with various artists over the years. But since 1986, the cover has featured different Chicano artists, and the first one featured Erin Cervantes, a change introduced by the second main editor, Raymond Paredes. The third editor, Chon Noriega, UCLA professor of theater, film, and television, and director of the CSRC, took over in 1996 and was editor until January 2016, last year, when I took over. After taking over in 1997, Noriega added regular artist communiques, an important source of information in an art world where Chicano artists are often ignored. Noriega was, in fact, the first editor to regularize an emphasis on the visual arts in this journal. In addition to his editor's introductions, often themselves important short essays on Chicano and Latino art, the journal has published 36 major research articles on the subject by many of the field's leading voices. Aztlán is thus the leading journal publishing on Chicano and Latino art. and an example of the power of ethnic studies to effect radical, meaningful change in the academy. In other words, the power of Chicanic studies to decolonize the academy. Now, what about exhibitions of Chicano and Latino art since the historic Cara show? Exhibition history is important, and it's another thing that art historians do. We trace that history. What is a particular field's exhibition history, and what can that tell us? How does a museum choose what to exhibit, and how does that produce meaning, affect viewers, create histories, drive up prices of artworks, inspire scholarship? Admittedly, the choice of what to exhibit can be conditioned by what a museum owns, what it collects, what its patrons, donors like, the audience it's trying to reach, as well as its politics. In 2008, the Los Angeles Times art critic Christopher Knight proclaimed that Chicano art was, quote, the new monarch ascending the throne to extend the line of succession in his review of Phantom Sightings, Art After the Chicano Movement at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, which was curated by Rita Gonzalez, who's here today, Howard Fox, and UCLA's Chon Noriega. In 2011, during the Getty Foundation's first blockbuster Pacific Standard Time, a collaboration featuring over 60 exhibitions in Southern California, there were an unprecedented 6 shows featuring Chicano art. So here they are, the OSCO Elite of the Obscure retrospective that was at LACMA in Williams College. It's the first monographic show dedicated to the East LA Conceptual and Performance Art Group, curated by Ondine Chavoya and Rita Gonzalez. And then this grouping of 4 exhibitions under the heading of LA Chicano, highlighting art from 1881 until 1983, curated by Chon Noriega, Teresita Romo, and Pilar Tompkins Rivas, and the Mapping Another LA, Art Along the Hyphen, Icons of the Invisible, which focused on Oscar Castillo, and Mural Remix, focusing on Sandra de la Loza. A sixth show was curated by Armando Duron, Chicanos Collect, the Duron Family Collection, at the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center Library. These 2011 exhibitions and the accompanying publications made a record amount of new research available to a wider public. We're now in the middle of PST3 LALA, 80 exhibitions that began opening in the summer of 2017 on Latin American and Latino art. A number of these shows focus on Chicano and or Latino artists, or incorporate them along with Latin American artists in the same exhibition space. So since the historic Cara show of 1990 to 93, we've witnessed a dramatic increase in the number of exhibitions. The 80 shows of PST LA will forever change the status of these fields. This is particularly noteworthy considering that, according to a recent 2015 study by the Mellon Foundation, only 3% of museum curators are Latino. Now let's discuss the teaching of Latinx art in graduate student advising. As Professor Adriana Zavala documented in her Aslan article, significantly more graduate work is being done on Latin American as opposed to US Latino art. And most research into Latino art is not happening in art history, but in ethnic studies or other departments. A conference presentation in fall 2016 by Rose Salceda, PhD candidate at UT Austin, revealed only 12 dissertations in progress at that time on Latino art. 6 are in progress at UCLA, but not a single one is in art history. 5 are in Chicano studies, and 1 is in architecture. Another study conducted by Salceda and UC Santa Cruz PhD Mary Thomas revealed that of the 200 panels at the College Art Association National Conference in 2016, only 1.4 sessions dealt with Latino art, constituting 7.2% of the papers presented. On a more positive note, the U.S. Latinx Art Forum was recently founded as an affiliated society of the College Art Association and held its first plenary at the 2017 annual conference. And by the way, I'm taking over as the chair of the national conference in February. So despite the increased number of exhibitions, publications, and new research on Chicano and Latino art, these fields remain in Nepantla, in between art history and ethnic studies, somewhere between US American and Latin American art. As an art historian who works on both contemporary as well as colonial art, I feel compelled to ground the term historically. First described in written sources in two early colonial dictionaries by Andrés de Olmos on the left and Alonso de Molina in the middle, Nepantla is a Nahuatl term defined as meaning en medio, in the middle. A fuller definition is found in Dominican Friar Diego de Duran's History of the Indies of New Spain of 1581. You see that on the right. In a passage recounting how he reprimanded a native convert suspected of secret pre-Columbian religious practices, the convert replied, "Padre, no te espantes, pues todavía estamos Nepantla." Father, don't be afraid, since we are still Nepantla. Duran glossed the term to mean that the native converts were in medio, in the middle, between their pre-Columbian world and the newly imposed Spanish Catholic one, and that furthermore, they were neutros, or neutral. According to Duran, Nepantla is el lugar de nada, no estar ni en un lado ni en otro, y el lugar de todo, estar a la vez en dos lugares incompatibles. That is, the place of nothing, to be neither on one side nor the other, and the place of everything, to be in two incompatible places at the same time. And it is this last gloss of Nepantla as a place of both nothing and everything, of being neither on one side nor the other, of being in two incompatible places simultaneously, that seems to best encapsulate where the study of Chicanx and Latinx art is currently situated. I am, I must admit, fearful that art history might pass up its chance to make an impact on the study of Latinx art. And I believe art history has something valuable to offer. Training as an art historian gives you unparalleled visual literacy, unmatched visual acuity. Was the choice to relegate the study of Chicanx art to ethnic studies a conscious one? Did our colleagues in the humanities in art history think the field would just go away? And more importantly, what does the future hold for the study of Chicanx, Latinx, and Latin American art? I began my talk today reflecting on art and activism since the historic Cara show by invoking Nepantla. And I conclude today inspired by other Chicanas who have re-theorized and rethought the term, including Gloria Anzaldúa, Pat Mora, Laura Perez, Alicia Gaspar de Alba, Lara Medina, Emma Perez, and various artists too, Irene Cervantes, Santa Barraza, and others. According to Anzaldúa, Nepantla is that uncertain terrain one crosses when moving from one place to another, when changing from one class, race, or sexual position to another, when traveling from the present identity into a new identity. She goes on, Nepantla is like a bridge, quote, bridges span liminal, threshold spaces between worlds. Transformations occur in this in-between space, an unstable, unpredictable, precarious, always in transition space lacking clear boundaries, end quote. It is this recent re-theorizing of Nepantla as a space of transformation, of potential innovation, of new perspectives that I find inspirational, that builds upon and improves the colonial definition of Nepantla as in between, in the middle, or even neutral. It is this definition which, after many years of struggle, I now willingly embrace as I teach and research Chicanx art. I will always have footholds in the elite world of art history and in the working class activist Chicano community. Professionally, I've become a border-crossing art historian, working across geographical, chronological, and disciplinary fronteras, inhabiting a third space between art history and ethnic studies. And in that third space, Chicanx and Latinx studies are growing. driven by demographic changes in the United States, the maturation of the political changes of the 60s and 70s, and now the ascendancy of Trumpism. Interest in the field is clearly on the upswing. Witness course enrollments, applications to graduate school, and submissions to journals. And look around at what's happening in the United States. Increased political activism, increased activism in the arts. We're living in another moment of dramatic political change fueled by social media, pushing the fronteras of both Chicano studies and art history in new directions. And that's one of my amazing graduate seminars at UCLA, having just come back from a Black Lives Matter protest. Demographics in the United States are changing. According to the 2016 US Census, 17.8% of the population is now Latino. In Los Angeles, in LAUSD, the public school district, second largest in the nation after New York City, 76.9% of the students are Latino. In the fall of 2015 at UCLA, over 800 students enrolled in the Introduction to Chicano Studies, and it's a trend that continued the second quarter, and it continued last year in 2016. And this fall, 2017, we have almost 900 students. There are 875 students in Intro to Chicano Studies. There are now over 500 majors and minors in that department. And there is no auditorium that can hold so many people, so the instructor, my amazing colleague, Gay Johnson, is teaching it twice a day to accommodate all these students. But are changing demographics the only reason to advocate for the teaching of and research into Chicanx and Latinx art? I think the study of these fields offers important special insights, and I believe in the value of knowledge, so the fact that they haven't been studied actually matters to me. But as I recount this history to you, I'm reminded of the words of post-structuralist philosopher Michel Foucault. Discourse has not only a meaning or a truth, but a history. And I think of his writings suggesting that power and knowledge are inextricably linked. What we call knowledge, what we decide is knowledge, what we decide is worthy of study is determined by power. And it's the same with artworks. What we decide constitutes a work of art is an operation of power. Not all visual renderings are deemed appropriate for study. And to give you a concrete example of what I mean, almost every college or university requires art history majors to take a course on the history of European Renaissance art. But not a single one requires students to learn Chicano art or, to my knowledge, Latin American art. So studying Latin American and Latinx art truly matters. Secondly, I believe that the study of Latin American and Latinx art offers us unique perspectives on the human condition. Latin American and Latinx cultures are hybrid cultures, cultures that survived colonialism. As a result, the study of these cultures has a particular power to destabilize nationalist discourse in art history, a discourse that upholds racial stereotypes, and one rooted in the very creation of the field. And I'm drawing here from an article I've published on colonial Mexican art, Race and the Historiography of Colonial Art, in this volume edited by Pamela Patton. I make this point clear to my students by asking them in class to suggest the traits of Latin American art. And these are the terms they throw out. Colorful, vibrant, bold, political, emotional, imitative, naive, inferior. Aren't these racial stereotypes about Latin Americans and Latinos, I ask them? And aren't these adjectives, colorful, emotional, political, inferior, the very traits that have kept Latin American and Latino art out of the canon of art history? In fact, race discourse about artistic style is central to art history, a prominent feature of the field since its foundation, as analysis of Heinrich Wölfflin's 1915 Principles of Art History demonstrates. Wölfflin's treatise on Renaissance and Baroque art attributed European stylistic differences to what he called the peculiarities of national imagination, which were present, quote, in the very blood of its citizens. These differences, according to Wöfflin, were permanent, part of seeing itself as, quote, the modes of vision are refracted by nationality, end quote. Thus, according to Wöfflin, stylistic variation results from inherent, essential, biological differences between what he called the races. Not surprisingly, throughout the 20th century and today in the 21st, stylistic discourses have often been bound up with essentializing notions of race. This is something you can clearly see from the vantage point of Latin American and Latinx art. And I'd like to conclude today by referring back to a question I asked at the opening. Can the tools of what is now being called Chicana studies decolonize art history? I understand decolonize as drawn from decolonial, as opposed to colonial or coloniality, or the coloniality of power, to use a phrase penned by Walter Mignolo in 2010. Decolonial approaches challenge Eurocentrism and Eurocentric notions of universality. They make visible Foucault's history of power as they perform what Mignolo has called epistemic disobedience. Decolonial approaches also have a strong activist arm, rooted in indigenous rights movements, in contrast to post-colonialism, which primarily occurred in the academy. Mignolo's epistemic disobedience is elaborated from post-colonial theorist Gayatri Spivak's epistemic violence. It's in the essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? According to Spivak and others, including Edward Said, for example, the subaltern, defined as former colonial subjects, are othered and silenced by Eurocentric discourse. The danger of this discourse is that it's cloaked as universalizing. And Mignolo's call for epistemic disobedience is particularly useful in this situation. I find it helpful to unsettle art historical assumptions that some art is of a higher quality than others, or that we should respect national and chronological borders. And that brings me to my final image today, Inverted America, America Invertida. It's a pen and ink drawing by Uruguayan artist Joaquin Torres Garcia from 1943. In it, we see the map of South America turned upside down. It critiques the supposed objectivity of maps and cartography, tools of colonialism, but also questions the canon of fine arts and art history. In fact, the artist used it on the cover of School of the South, Escuela del Sur, his manifesto on the arts. His manifesto in this image gave form to his idea that our North is the South. Our North is the South. A rejection of Latin American art's dependence on the US and Europe. It's also a call to action to promote Latin America and its indigenous cultures in particular, as the origin of a new universalizing art, a new hemispheric art. It was a decolonial approach before decolonialism, an example of why it's important to know this history, not just Western histories. It also visualizes the benefits of bringing together Latinx and Latin American art, as I tried to do today in this talk, and as PST-LALA has done. In conclusion, it is this approach to art history, one that dares to inquire into art history's history, its discourse, its hidden biases and agendas, that I believe in, and that I believe has the power to transform not just the academy, but our everyday lives. Now you understand my commitment to decolonizing art history through Chicanic studies, and why I moved half of my line out of art history. Thank you. Thank you. I think we're going to take some comments or questions.
This is your time.
Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you if, for the Teaching Chicana and Latino Art History. Is that an article or a journal or a book?
Okay, great. Thank you
And
so
how
much.
can I access that?
It's an edited dossier in the journal Aslan. So it's a collection of 5-6 articles. I've written an introduction. And then we put 6 syllabi from professors from across the United States online for free. So if you have any trouble finding it, email me. I'm happy to help you. Yeah, it's fantastic, that dossier.
Hi, Charlene.
Hi.
I have thank you so much. What an amazing conversation. You're echoing a lot of thoughts I've been having recently, participating in this whole PST-LALA thing. As you know, the field of art history doesn't necessarily exist the way it does here in Latin America, right? Back when I was studying colonial art history with you,
Former student of mine.
right. When I try to go study it in Ecuador or, Quito or Cusco, there's just no places to study it. So art history isn't framed the way it is here. So something interesting has been happening as I'm paying attention to the field down there in Latin America is that art history has been increasingly written by curators, by curators who participate in art fairs and biennials, curators who are trained and study abroad. No, go to Bard, go to Goldsmiths, and go to other UCLA, go to other places, which is of course a long history of Latin American scholarship and artistic talent. We're honed on studying abroad. No. But it's kind of an interesting thing if you start thinking about it in terms of field, no? In terms of theory. What is it that you're learning in New York, in Paris, in London, and what are you bringing back to Sao Paulo, to Quito, and to Medellin?
Yeah.
Because there's only so much Frankfurt School that can be spread around.
Yeah.
So I'm, in some interesting way, art history that's being developed in Latin America, not in all cases, but in some cases, is a really kind of like very interesting kind of curatorial neoliberal paradigm of seeing art history through the curatorial lens.
Yeah.
So, how is it that you would see here a way of maintaining the political will, huh? That you find somehow inherent in Chicano and Latino studies?
Yeah.
And how it might address the inherent kind of elitism of art history. How is it that it can maintain its political will through time, you think?
Okay, that's a fantastic question. And you're absolutely right that it's why the research behind exhibitions is so important in my mind. I'm not interested in exhibitions that aren't backed up by real research. That's just like, I don't know, interior decorating or something to me. Not to be overly rude, but the other interesting thing, I've just returned from Colombia, right? From the university in Medellin, which has the first PhD there. So I've been kind of witnessing this. People go abroad to be trained, and they come back and start to establish these PhDs in countries that don't have art history very well entrenched. It's also, you're pointing to one of the major tension that I see in PST-LALA too, between Latin American and Latinx artists, and it's the issue of class differences, right? So that's a wonderful question. How do we take the political agency of Chicanx studies and keep that momentum moving forward? There are all sorts of conflicts with museums, donors, boards, what a museum collects, who a museum thinks its audience is. So I'm just hoping that this next younger generation, people like you and younger people too, will bring this kind of political urgency to what you do. I'm not a curator, and by choice actually, because I felt that I could make more of a difference in my research in the classroom. So I have hopes, but maybe not a clear answer there. Thank you, that's a great question. Hi.
Is that on? Yeah, okay. So on the way here, I heard over the loudspeaker, they were announcing that there was art from Latin America and Latino art. So if you're an artist from Latin America, aren't you a Latino art? Am I a Latinx? Am I a Chicanx? Am I a Chicano? And am I indigenous? And this is Hispanic Heritage Month.
Oh, okay, barf, okay. Okay,
So I'm
yeah.
confused. I was just at the exhibit, they had at the Audrey for La Raza.
Yeah,
So,
it's amazing.
So Joe Rasso said that La Raza is La Raza Cósmica, the cosmic race, which actually includes white, black, brown, and yellow. Mm-hmm. So we are really all that, but also more. Mm-hmm. So in describing in your presentation, in referring to the Latin, Latinx, Latina, Latino,
mm-hmm.
Chicana, la 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 la. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's confusing to me, and I'm one. I could imagine how other people see us
mm-hmm. Yeah.
from looking from out.
Yeah. Yes, I felt compelled to put that slide in. At first I thought, well, gee, everybody knows this already. And then I thought, no, actually, probably not. Not everybody understands the complexity. And the way, my own identity, I think everyone's identity is mutable, is changeable. And I think about the way, I'm starting to use the X. I actually think it's important to say Chicanx, especially in the classroom, right? It sends a signal about inclusivity. Speaking Spanish, I can't quite work it in, the X every time there's an O or A word. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. So I think, to say you're Chicana, Chicano, as you know, is to take a very particular political stance. So that's probably the term I fall back on. I'm also not interested in telling other people how to identify themselves either. I actually feel like that's up to, with all of the political problems around that's something, an individual choice that has to happen. I have my own agenda, but I'm very conscious in the classroom to not impose that on people. Yeah, I put those slides in the beginning because that's really one of the most controversial things that we could talk about, our identity.
Follow up with that.
Sure.
When I was I took a semester at Northern Arizona University and took a class, Race, Power, and Politics with David Camacho. And he said La Raza, to remove all the Latin American and all the problems in that. But then that never took. It's sort of like I went to grad school, then thought I could say, and nobody knew what I was saying. And the term didn't catch. And I was wondering about that as in sort of he said, an all-encompassing term that was less maybe defining.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're right. There was a moment when La Raza that term's really falling out of favor right now in the United States. People don't really understand its history and the origins of that term. Latino's another one of these all-encompassing terms, but when you start thinking about that, well, gee, Hispanic is too. So I think very carefully about the kind of politics of these various words. Yeah. Other thoughts, yes.
Hi, really enjoyed your talk, thank you. Sort of picking up on that, I wonder how you feel about the term political and just the idea of the political always being associated with the Latino, Latinx, Chicano, sort of culture and artistic production. So, is there a time, just like perhaps, when identity became sort of a bad word, right? Because it was cliched and whatnot. Is there a sense that perhaps the political, and let's not even talk about the overarching reality of our politics in the United States today, which is obviously very relevant. But I'm wondering about your feelings about to what extent is the political perhaps also a limiting framework, and does it always have to be in opposition to aesthetic or artistic rigor?
That's a wonderful question. It's again, I love how people are pointing to the major kind of controversies or points of friction in this field. And but describing Latino art as political is an easy way for many people to dismiss it, right? That's just political poster art. That's not really art. And it also, by insisting on the political nature of Latinx art, you exclude certain artists whose politics are not political, right? Or whose politics, whose aesthetics are not obviously political. I I think about, though, I remember being fed in art history in graduate school this idea that certain art was political. I think it was feminist art, if I'm recalling. That was political, but Michelangelo wasn't, and Rothko wasn't. And it was the first time I lost my temper in graduate school in the graduate method seminar, and I just lost it. Like, don't tell me abstract expressionism isn't political, or don't tell me Michelangelo, who's working for the Pope, that isn't political. So it's a question of how visible are the politics, and certain politics are singled out as unacceptable in art history. Some politics are fine, but the politics of brown people, not acceptable.
Yeah, thank you, Charlene. That was awesome right here.
I can't see you. Okay, thank you.
That was just so awesome.
Thank you.
And I was thinking that a lot of us in this audience, right, like who read at slang and follow, know that story, but how important it is for everyone to know that story and really read ethnic studies to catch up, basically.
Yes.
But anyways, besides that, I wonder if you could elaborate more about the issue of class. But also, what also is never said is the racialization, the race aspect, right? Because, we have to also, it seems to me that Latin American art has whitened.
Yeah.
And we need to really summon with the racialization of Latinx art.
Yeah.
So Latin American art summons auctions, collectors, going to Arbo, right? All the art fairs in Sao Paulo and in Bogota, in Buenos Aires. It's got this, right, elite whiteness. And in fact, a lot of the artists that a lot of people take as like authentic Latin American are very much elite, very much European.
Yeah.
You don't see indigenous Latin American artists. You don't see Afro Latin American artists, right? That's not talked about, right? But so it's kind of whitened, and then Latinx art, when people think about Latinx art, is kind of like baja categoria. Like I was interviewing a collector that said, oh, well, what is that? That sounds like ghetto, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder if we could head on talk about not only class, but the racism that challenges us from taking this artist seriously and from really, learning about, our history here, and I wondered, exhibitions like this are great, but I think that they don't really get to, the incredible inequities between the Latin American art and all the fetish and sexiness around it, and how Latinx art, right, still doesn't summon that sexiness and why that is, right?
Yeah.
So we need to name that. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You're absolutely right that one of the dangers of mixing Latin American and Latinx together is that certain artists are kind of elevated, and they are artists that fit into this wider canon, that are artists, and you're absolutely right about the racialization for sure. And it's not just in modern contemporary. I can think of it in colonial art too. Everyone's studying Creole art, and that's why I think decolonialism can be a strategy, because it is rooted in indigenous rights movements. It's not just in the academy, it's actually a real thing. But yeah, I'm completely in favor of us calling out our own racism, calling out racism in the academy, realizing that you were raised in the United States, you grew up in a system of white supremacy, and you need to really stop and take a look at how that's affected how you think. It's something I try to do in the classroom, and I think it's something we need to continue to do. Yeah, just as someone who loves teaching, I'm really committed to talking about that. But thank you, that's an incredible reminder. Thank you. Hi, Karen. Hi.
I am so blown away about all of the information you've given us. A lot of that I knew, but to hear it mustered in one place was overwhelming. I found myself gasping, feeling like I was going to cry. And then your last line, I want you to pull it back for the audience. This is not just your story, leaving art history and taking a joint appointment, maybe giving some context for, a senior scholar doing that. Because we have this view of the academy that, once you're a senior scholar, you've arrived, you can do what you want. And I could hear in your voice something else. And so I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit more, but also pull it back to the more general about this is not just your story, it's my story, it's, you know, the story we've been hearing but not been publicly proclaiming. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a whole part of this paper I edited out that included admissions data to our graduate program in the Department of Art History at UCLA. And until 2015 of fall, there was not a single Chicano student admitted in the graduate program since my arrival there in 2000. And I pulled the data, and it's not that there weren't qualified people. I'm not going to name names. Some of you will know who I'm talking about. There's someone who's now a professor at Penn who was kicked out of my program. There are other people, incredibly eminent professors at other institutions, people at the Smithsonian, who were not admitted into our program. And I just realized that I could not train Chicanos in the Department of Art History at UCLA. And Chicano Studies have been trying to get me to come over for many, many years, but I thought, I'm an art historian, right? I'm not a social scientist. I have had some classes in Chicano Studies, but at a certain point it was a question of what was important to me and a question of my own survival, just my own sort of emotional, spiritual, intellectual survival. And, but I haven't given up on art history. I'm still trying and still feel that we can, it's not going to be my generation, it's going to be a younger generation. And I can see that, I hope, that there's this younger generation where all voices are welcome in all the departments of the academy. Yeah. Yikes, I can't believe I just said that in public, but. So I'm up for promotion this year. We'll see what happens now.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Thank you very much. This was really an inspiring talk. I mean, I have to tell you, I came in basically knowing almost nothing besides the few questions about terminology. I'm an architect and an architectural historian. First of all, people in an academic world can change their life at a certain moment. And I don't want to go into my own story, but it is possible. So I totally agree with you. You need to do some changes, but this is something else. Going to the question of political and architecture, you mentioned a PhD or something at UCLA architecture, yes. But I was wondering myself, how much do I see the field of architecture part of your narrative? I mean, is this only studies in Latin American architecture? Is there something more? Can also architecture be part of decolonizing the field? And how do I decolonize architecture? Which is very much power, commission, competition, superstars, and so on. What kind of message do I give to younger generation who are in the field of architecture? And they feel, I mean, the same contradiction that you have been explaining. So maybe you can tell us something also about this other side, I mean, of the research, I mean, of what we need to do in this field.
So
Thank you.
I don't know, I have no architectural
and
training.
Maybe you are not the right person, but it's good to start thinking. I mean, it made me thinking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know very much about the field of architecture. I teach a little bit of architectural history, and but I think this is more of a general question. I think, and I try to actually live the politics I proclaim to believe in. And when I'm, for example, on a committee, if I see all the finalists all look the same and are not contributing to diversity at my institution, I say something. I just saw a preview of a promotional video for a department at UCLA, and I said, I'm sorry, everybody in that video is white. I mean, that cannot be. There are all these amazing scholars of color in that field. Where are they? I put together a conference this summer with someone, and I said, I'm sorry, but there's only one person of color involved, and it's me, so we need some more. So I think we have to, in our everyday lives, think about diversifying at every step, right? It's not just when I'm writing papers or when I'm in the classroom. It is literally every moment of the day I'm thinking about those things. And the most mundane interactions, like being polite to everyone, assuming that every person I meet deserves my respect. I mean, just even at that very low level. So I don't know anything about architecture, but.
Hi, Charlene.
Hi. Hi.
Mine is not a question, but I'm not going to be one of those people that goes on a monologue. I promise. I just loved what you said today, and I really take it as a call to action. As an art historian, this is something that we need to change.
Yeah.
You know, and we can start as educators. We can make Chicanics art or Latin American art a requirement in the degree, just like Western art history is a requirement in the degree. So I really call on people here today to take this to heart and to make changes in your institution, wherever you are. If you're an educator, we can make those changes within the institution. That's the only way it will change. So thank you for everything that you've said today.
Thank you. Thank you. That's.
I too want to thank you. I'm an educator as well, and I teach psychology and invite my students to go all over the city to lectures like this so that they can expand their minds. Like an architect, get involved in gentrification. There's lots of things that we can put our finger, our pulse on the inequities throughout our society. And I have a question. How can you possibly destabilize colonization without being political?
I think everything's political.
Yeah,
so
I do. I mean,
you show me Rothko, I'm like, that's political. I think everything's political.
Yeah,
but
I'm a
the
psychology
gentrification, that
professor.
was fantastic.
Right, exactly. You know, even in the psyche, the conditioning, I'm always talking about this concept, probably because I'm a person of color, like things like minority. You know, there's a wonderful mural in East LA that says, "We are not a minority." How are you going to be 3/4 of the planet and be a minority? You know, things like that. And the last comment, I've even gotten so to the point where I don't use the term history. It is a colonized term, and I just talk about antiquity or the present to condition, although there's not a word such as that, the thinking of people. So I think you have to be political if you're going to destabilize colonization and have this cosmic Raza, because we're all human beings.
Thank you. Only certain people can claim to not want to be political, right? I mean, we all know this, right? That's a privilege.
Hi, it was so inspirational to hear you speak again. I heard you speak yesterday at Santa Monica College, so I came out. I want to say something related to what she was saying, and that has to do with hiring practices. I'm one of the former, or the Getty Multicultural Internship alumni, and we met earlier to talk about issues like this. And one of the primary, and then I did a survey on it, but one of the primary issues is getting through the door, and it comes down to things of personal responsibility. So if you guys see a resume coming through your door and you think it needs work, or there's someone that you think is really spectacular, I don't know what the word is, I would encourage you to call them and talk to them about it, because some things are very basic. Also, I'm going to promote CAM this year. For those of you who don't know, it's the California Association of Museums. But there was some talk about it also with people exiting the field because of discouragement. So on February 5th to 7th, I'm not sure what day, but I'm participating in a panel with Dr. Nicole Ivey, who's the Director of Inclusion from AAM, who you may have heard speak if you went to the conference recently. And then also Letitia Buckley is going to be talking, and she's the interim executive director for the Los Angeles County Arts Commission. And I'm going to be talking about individual responsibility. And it's really hard. I don't know if you know, but it takes 3 years once you get your first part-time job, and most of them work 2 to 3 part-time jobs before they get their first full-time job. So if you want to wait another 3 years to see something happen, then don't do anything. But if you want to see change happen, then I encourage you to attend. It's for mid-career, mid-level to upper-level management, the panel, but it's open to everyone. And also encourage you to just, on your own, help someone else out.
I love that. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Rose Salceda. I'm I'm the Associate Director of the U.S. Latinx Art Forum. Charlene highlighted some of the work I've done along with some of my colleagues and crew at USLA. I'm also a PhD candidate in art history at UT Austin. And I'd like to add, I'm a UCLA reject.
I'm so sorry. I did my best.
I know.
There are other people in the room, too.
Yeah. So sitting here, it's really exciting. I loved your talk. It's really encouraging, affirmative, and makes me want to get up and take action. And your comments previously about the hiring and all of that. So I'm thinking, what are some direct things that we can do now? So Charlene highlighted some of the research that I've been doing. I've been tracking all of the PhD students and candidates who specialize in Latinx art across the U.S. We have there's a little bit more now with this new year. There's about 22 of us across the U.S. We're specializing in Latinx art. Another one's here, Gina Diaz. You raise your hand. And so we are coming up for jobs. There's only 20 of us. We really need to make sure that we secure jobs. Some of us are on the job market this season. Some will be going on it next year. Mentor us, help us. And invite us to give these job talks, invite us to publish papers in journals, whatever you can do. There's really just a small community of us, and it's important that we find these positions so that we can teach our history, archive our history, recruit the next generation of scholars.
Can I add that you're giving a talk at UCLA on Wednesday, October 11th? From 12 to 1:30, she'll be in conversation with the artist Salomon Huerta, whose work is in Home and other shows. I think it's in 4 shows, his work. And you'll be talking about your research with him and the Chicano Studies Research Center Wednesday. It's free.
Thank you for that plug.
Judith? Can someone give the mic to Judith? No. Okay.
I'm Katha.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. So, yes. So Judith Hernandez and Patsy Valdez. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Give me 1 second. Judith, I'm totally blanking. So what is the date of it? October 28th at
Beats Art Center in Pomona. It's campus of the Fairplex. Patsy Valdez and I will have a conversation with my dear friend Charlene Villaseñor Black.
So please come to that. That's an amazing show.
Everyone's
Thank you.
welcome.
I'm sorry. And I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. Katha.
Hi,
Pachetti, Cal State Long Beach. I teach Latin American art history, and I've heard 2 things. I've heard that our expectations for a younger generation are very high. We're very much hopeful for a new crowd of academics, museum workers, cultural workers, activists to affect change. And then I've heard individuals say, we have received a call to action, that we are responsible for bringing about changes in the departments and the institutions where we work. But I have graduate students, Latinas, women of color, who are utterly disillusioned about change coming about with existing museum directors. I'm going to be very open here. Leadership in the Getty. There is utter disillusionment in terms of the possibility of bringing about changes in perspectives of people in positions of institutional power. And I get very discouraged hearing that, because if we extend that thought to our current political environment, the next 4 to 8 to 12 years, if we have this assumption that it's not possible for us to affect change, it's a pretty depressing thought. So my question to you is, and it comes down to who the audience is for a program like Getty LALA. Is it the younger generations, or is it art world and academia professionals whose attitudes need to change? Is it possible for their perspectives to shift? Is it possible for them to move into, theoretically, the space of Nepantla should be space we all aspire to, where we feel this capacity to cross a bridge to another world and be in different worlds to gain an understanding of how other people think and what their experience has been. So what is the potential for that, and it comes down to what is the potential for art and culture to affect change for everyone who is not of a younger generation in positions of power?
Okay, I'm not a good person to ask about like the museum world, but I'm gonna, just because I'm like an academe, I can go on and on about universities. I feel very strongly like hopelessness is not an option. It's not an option. I'm here standing on the backs of my ancestors, and I thought of, Junot Díaz said this thing about, he was speaking to a group of students in New York, and I saw it on Facebook, and I thought, that is so powerful. I put it on my door at UCLA, that, your ancestors were on their knees before authority, so you could be here. And I think about that, like what my ancestors went through. So I can be here with my fancy PhD at the Getty, of all places, and at UCLA. So hopelessness for me is just not an option. There was a time before the election, last presidential election, where I was going around saying, I'm tired of talking about identity. Like, isn't there some new thing we can talk about in the art world? And then the election happened, and I realized how foolish I had been. But absolutely, the change begins with each of us, but change also has to be systemic, right? It can't just be like each of us in our own little niche fighting our fight. There has to be systemic change, and I am hopeful that will come. It's not going to come for my generation. It's going to come for a younger generation, but I am, hopelessness just not an option for me at this point, maybe out of self-preservation.
But again, it's the younger generation.
And I think about, they recently did a look at the demographics of the faculty at UCLA. It was actually more diverse in the 1970s than it was a few years ago when they did this study. So, yeah, I do. Just for me saying the next generation does not stop me from acting out my politics every single day. Let me say that. And for fighting systemic oppression every single day, no matter how much my colleagues hate me for it. Okay, yes.
Hi, my name is Carlos. I am a multicultural intern survivor, I should say. More like it. I guess my first experience actually had Paquette in my undergrad, and it was hard, and it's very discouraging. And I will say that putting a lot of that pressure on a millennial generation and the next generation behind me is a lot. And, and I kind of just, after the elections, I hid in my bedroom. It's been, it seems like it's been so hard of trying to, you walk in, you're like, yes, I grabbed that internship, everything's gonna change. And I go in, and then I kind of get to a point where this like ivory tower is like, just hovering over you, and then you feel like you're alone, and you're you're kind of one of those few brown kids, and it's something that you want to do so passionately. And then you have things like directors going like, you're nobody, like you're just the intern. Like instead of doing research, I was most likely doing just coffee runs. And so like that was wasted. And so I guess for me, what I'm here is I would like to pursue a graduate degree, but also at the end of the day, I mean, I understand that you kind of gave me the why, but also, who am I and why should I still continue and preserve this of my people and my culture? And it's so sad. And will those things even be in a museum, or just not even a museum, but just being inclusive? And when I talked to like the director, I would present like look, I really, there's a lot of things missing here, and there's a lot of gaps. And at the end of the day, it was me being thrown out rather than me staying and trying to change an institution.
I'm sorry to hear that, and it's not a unique story, right? And I think about how important it is for us to see each other and to recognize each other and to be there for each other. And I mentioned kindness earlier, and I think about like radical kindness and radical love as something that we should extend to each other. And particularly when you're isolated in an institution that's not made for you. It's an institution not made for you, that was designed to keep us out, really. That it's really important that we reach out to other people that we see. I gave a bunch of papers on the East Coast last year, and I remember just like seeing a former student of mine at Princeton, and just that moment of like refuge that we had where we could be together talking on the Princeton campus, or I was at Dartmouth also. And there but you're right, it's an extra burden, right? We can never speak in the singular. We're always speaking in the plural. We're always having to think in this plural way. And the only way that's going to change is if there are more of us, I believe.
Sorry. Hi.
Okay, go.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm Ken Baca, and I'm just going to bounce off of his really great point, and I'm part of that next generation. So I am an undergraduate art historian, and I want to be a professor, or at least that's what I keep telling myself. I am up against white serving institutions that I have never really been a part of. I'm the only person in 3 years who will write a thesis on Latin American art. From an academic who has gone through the entire process, how do I change the academy? How am I part of a system that has always excluded me, and I am still trying to change it, and it always spits back in my face? Do you have any words of advice? I'm looking to you right now as, I guess, like a Keynote mentor. How do I keep going at something that I love? I love the discipline, but it doesn't seem to love me back.
You can feel free to email me, but I'm going to say this. Mentoring is actually really important to me, and I do have these real conversations with the people who are my advisees. And there are moments where you need to advise people, you need to go through this hoop and this hoop so you can be here to affect change. But why don't you email me and we could have an actual conversation, okay? All right.
I just wanted to say quickly that I had the wonderful experience to meet Dolores Huerta a couple weeks ago. She's 87 years old. They gave her $100,000, and she could have did whatever she wanted with it, but she went ahead and started the Dolores Huerta Foundation. Now, this 87-year-old lady, and I'm not young as y'all, but I'm not old as her yet, and she inspired me so much that whatever you want to do, no matter what it looks like, the ivory towers, at one time, they were not even an ivory tower. And to just keep pursuing whatever it is in a broad range, maybe teach history to kids in your local, PTA or the basement of your school. And that keeps you involved. That's what she did to encourage me, Si se puede. and like Obama took that, but that really was hers, that it's not as gruesome as it looks, that we are here and we just keep going.
I thank you so much. I keep thinking of our ancestors, right? That's what I think of. I go back to that and hold on to that. Are we okay on time, or are we're okay.
I'm Eugenia Sumnick-Levins. I teach art history at Los Angeles Valley College, and we are mostly Latino-serving institution. And I just wanted to talk about teaching art history. And it was brought up that why aren't we requiring Latino art history as part of the major? And, you know, from community college professors' perspective, I have to say that a lot of our curriculum, unfortunately, is driven by the institutions to which our students are transferring. So if UCLA isn't requiring it as part of the major, if Cal State Long Beach isn't requiring it as part of the major, we can't get those courses approved as part of our curriculum because it's not driving the student success rates.
Yeah.
And so I think that it really needs to be part of the conversation.
No, you're absolutely right. That students are taking what they need to transfer to places like UCLA. UCLA, I will say, is a global department. It was one of the first in the nation, this global department. And we do have a range of what's been called non-Western courses. So I'm actually proud of the diverse range of survey courses that we have at UCLA. But yeah, I'm still waiting to see Chicano art required somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. That's actually a great question. I don't know, do we have any other professors from the Cal State system? Because it's something that's so important is I've been on these calls trying to reform our curriculum and our transfer curriculum, these transfer model curriculum, the TMC and the CID, and the biggest challenge we have is the Cal State professors who don't want to change their major requirements because art history is not a division, it's not its own discipline. And I just want to encourage you to do the hard work we did in the community college level, and I want to thank Dina Height, former president who's here, her and another former president, Sandy Esslinger, as part of the Art Center in Southern California, took this to the College Art Association and then to Sacramento to our chancellor's office for community colleges to make art history an actual discipline because it was not a discipline in the community college. It's still not a discipline in the Cal State system. It's a discipline of art, and art history is simply a major, and it takes work, and it takes institutional work just in terms of that, to change the Cal State curriculum to, for instance, not have Africa, Oceania, and the Americas as one single class, to have more than one Latin American class. And I can say, as someone who's tried to champion this, it's impossible until we get the Cal State system, because we're seen as, in this hierarchy, it's UC, Cal State, and look at how many community college professors are here today. And we're the ones who are teaching the majority of students. And so in some ways, we're affecting the discipline, because when all of us go back to our classes, we're going to be incorporating this knowledge. The next time I teach Felix Gonzalez-Torres next semester, right, I'm going to talk about him as a Latinx artist instead of simply within gender and sexuality. And so it's these things that we carry on, but then we need to also in all of our institutions, I think, make these widespread changes. So that's me giving the last little bit, because we have to thank Charlene for giving an amazing talk. Thank you all for coming.